the space I have created for myself to be around no one else. I'm working on my spells to get me out of here. Oh yeah, your words.
So good evening, everyone. Really great to see so many people here today. I'm hoping that you can see my screen. So is it on the right slide, Seb? I'm waiting for someone to acknowledge me. Yes, it is. Yeah, brilliant. So I am absolutely blown over today to have the opportunity to introduce Julie Diamond, who has come all the way from the States to work with us today around this issue of power. And one of the wonderful things I think that we found through the awfulness of the pandemic is the opportunities that we have to connect with one another. And it's been great to be able to connect with people and to invite them into our space. So really grateful to have Julie to talk about the new levels of leadership. And in particular, I think one of the things that I was going to say was that we at BRAF have been working really hard on trying to disrupt and to shift and to create a more equitable world and society. And I came across this idea of Julie's Diamond Power Index a couple of years ago. And since then, we have been engaging with it in a number of ways and really using it effectively to think about how we develop and support leaders. And in particular, we've been using it, just to mention, as part of the PACT program, which has been a program that has been devised to help civil leaders learn more about how they can work more effectively and use their power well. And that work has been supported by Barrow Cadbury Trust. So I'm really grateful that we've been able to use the Diamond Power Index on that program too. So for those of you that don't know, this is a part of the Equality Republic programming of work. And for those of you who are not part of the Equality Republic, what we're doing here is trying to offer a new type of space for those of us that are interested in equality. We're wanting to offer a space where okay is not okay, where we can be really challenging of what we've done, how we've done it, and the impact it's made. And we want to create a new territory, really, where equality can flourish, it can grow, and it can really make a difference to people's lives. Because when we talk about equality, we're not talking about facts and figures, we're talking about people. And we really want to get back to recognizing the importance of that, but also reinvigorating the equality space. We feel that we've become too comfortable and that we really need to begin to do something more to stimulate and to support each other to do better in this area of equality. And these seminars and some of the discussions and the debates we've been having are ways of introducing people to a range of different things that can help in this idea of furthering issues of equality and human rights. So you're very welcome to the event. I'm going to introduce Julie now. So Julie Diamond, you would have seen, I'm not going to read out all your bio, Julie, because it's a bit long, really.
Don't, please.
It's very
spare me and spare everybody. Yeah.
No. But as I said, I'm really excited to have Julie along here. She's the founder of Diamond Leadership, an organization providing innovative leadership and talent development services. And I have found Julie not only very transformational to work with, but very concerned about how things land. I think one of the things that I've noticed about our work with Julie is that she cares about impact. She cares about the results. And this is really the benefit of the tool. And I'm really grateful to have you here again, Julie, to speak about the tool and to introduce more people to this opportunity.
Thank you.
I'm going to look at Severin, because Severin has got my brain. Is there anything that I might need to have said before I hand over to Julie? I can hand over to Julie now. Right, Julie, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you all today. I'm very privileged to be here and really appreciate the invitation to speak and to talk about power. And so I'm going to share my slides and just assume this all works perfectly. And it looks like it's, oops, here we go. So great. So I think everybody sees my slides and the new rules of leadership. And so we have, I think we've got 90 minutes, a little bit less than 90 minutes together today, unless I've completely messed things up, but that's my expectation. And we're going to talk a little bit about where we are in this moment, sort of the changing expectations on leaders. And then we're going to really talk a lot about power, power intelligence, and something I call the lens of power, how power changes you in a role of power, in a leadership role or a position of power, and then also how it changes the people around you. And then I'm going to talk about the Diamond Power Index that Joy just talked about, assessing the use of power, looking at specific power behaviors and impact, and how it's been applied. So where are we really? We're in a very changing landscape for leaders today. Things have really changed, and with it, there's new expectations for what leadership means. And to use and overuse the phrase of the moment, we're in a moment of cultural reckoning. And what's been tolerated is just not tolerated anymore. What's been expected from leaders, what leaders are held accountable for, what they've been evaluated on, all these things are changing. So let's look at them. One is behavior. So what was once kind of accepted behaviors in a leadership role, tolerated, maybe not liked, but seen as normal or just the way things are or the way things work, that's changing. Not fully, it hasn't changed, but it's changing. And leaders are being held to a much higher standard with a lot more public scrutiny. Leaders are now are being judged on and expected to deliver on diversity and to lead inclusively. And this is now becoming a real bottom line, that it's imperative that leaders are now expected to create equitable organizations, not just profitable ones. Again, when I say this is changing, how long is it going to take, this change process? We're not there yet, but this is definitely now a topic of conversation, whether or not every organization is there or not. These are new expectations. The other thing I want to call out is that leaders are now seen as responsible for the cultures of their organizations. They're judged on the health of the workplace culture more than ever before. So they're seen as stewards of, if not creators of, the culture of the workplace, whether it's healthy, inclusive culture where people flourish, where talent is amplified, or whether it's a toxic one where bullying and harassment and discrimination are rampant and driving away talent and destroying morale. And leaders are now being seen as responsible for that. It's now a connection between how leaders lead and the cultures of their organization. And finally, I think it's about power. Really, it comes down to this moment of cultural reckoning, really comes down to new expectations about how we use power, how we understand power, how leaders use their power, whether they're using it in a fair and equitable way, or whether it's being used in a sort of inequitable or just self-serving way. And people, especially, well, all people, but especially now millennials coming up, are demanding more voice, more participation, more power to determine their fate. And so these new rules of leadership are really new rules of power. And the expectation is that leaders are now power smart, right? That they have power intelligence. So think of it like social intelligence or emotional intelligence, which really came on the scene, 20, 25, 30 years ago, and changed expectations. I feel like now leaders need to learn how to use power effectively and to make sure that others in their organization are using their power effectively in ways that benefit people and the organizational culture. Now, I just want to acknowledge something here, address the elephant in the room, that people are not speaking about power as much as you'd think. I mean, in certain circles where we're focused on equity and justice and anti-racism work. I think the word power is up. But when I go into organizations, people frown at me. I'm not greeted with open arms when I talk about power inside of organizations. In fact, people correct me frequently. They tell me that I'm really talking about influence or ethics, or they, when I talk about power not being used well, they chalk it up to personality. So it's just a few bad apples. Those are just personality traits. Those are just, bad actors. The truth is that even though people don't want to address it directly, it's power dynamics and use of power are super important to focus on. And, it's more than just having good people skills. It's not enough to just follow ethical guidelines, because power are moment by moment behaviors, right? There's small little things and how we interact every day in our smallest behaviors between coworkers and from the top down. And so I define power, something everybody asks me at some point to define power. It's the most defined thing ever. And there's 100 million different ways to define it. So I typically try to avoid it because it's a contentious area. But I really like Dr. Keltner's definition here. He's a professor of psychology at Berkeley, has written a wonderful book called The Power Paradox. And he talks about the capacity to alter someone's condition or state of mind by providing or withholding resources like food, affection, money, knowledge, or punishment, administering punishments, which can be anything from social ostracism, withholding information, job termination. And one of the reasons I like this definition is that it defines power as a resource, a control over a valued resource, right? So you have information that gives you power. You have a degree of belonging in your network, or you have a social identity, and that's going to give you power. And that also means that there's many, many, many kinds of power. So we're not just talking about title. We're not just talking about position, but we're talking about everything from your access to information, to your seniority, to your degree of belonging and comfort, skill set. And so this also means, therefore, that it's contextual. So, your expert knowledge, your expertise is going to give you high status, maybe on the teams that you're in or in your organization. But if you use that expert knowledge at home, it's just going to make you annoying. It's not going to raise your status. In fact, it might even diminish your status to use certain powers in the wrong context. So this is one of the things that I think is really important. And it shows that power can be used well or poorly because there's so many different kinds of power. So for example, that expertise that I just called out, right? You can use expertise to make sure that, let's say, your team's making the very best decision, or you can use your expertise to just, win arguments, or, argue with your opponent, or sound like the smartest person in the room, right? To just argue for your pet project or idea, or your informal power. So that's like your degree of belonging, your insider status. That's so critical to onboarding and to making people feel welcome. So you could use the fact that you're an insider to onboard newcomers or Black and minority ethnic employees or people who don't have the same status. Or you can use that insider status to just like stay in your little clique and protect the old so-called old boys club. So all these powers can be used well or it can be used poorly, right? And when it's used poorly, this is the kind of dysfunction that we're seeing in organizations, right? And studies affirm this, that of all the employee complaints, the number one issue that people complain about, they may not use the word power, but they're power issues, whether it's bullying, bias, discrimination, harassment, insider, outsider dynamics, cliques, all that. These are power dynamics. And I looked recently at the top 5 employee complaints according to the Society for Human Resources, and 4 out of the top 5 are directly about power: bias and favoritism, bullying, lack of pay equity, and harassment and inappropriate behaviors. So when we use power well, what are we doing? We're like creating a more psychologically safe organization. People feel free to speak up. They're going to share. They're going to be more engaged. They feel free to contribute. They feel respected, treated with civility. It's safe. They're not using their discretionary energy to protect themselves. That discretionary energy is able to flow into the organization, into creative and innovative work, right? And people feel included. They have access to resources. And I just want to emphasize, we know this isn't, rocket science. It's just common knowledge. And they're also just not feel good, squishy things, but they really have an incredible price tag. Billions of dollars. The most expensive thing in organizations is talent. And when people don't feel safe to speak up, or when they speak up and they're criticized or mocked, or when they meet with skepticism, like, well, that doesn't work around here, they shut up and you're wasting all that talent. Power is also critical to good decision-making, right? Because when people don't speak up, they're not going to give you the critical information you need. Or if you have power and you're overly fond of your own opinion, you're going to make decisions that are going to be really dangerous for the organization. You're going to be led astray very easily. And there's lots of examples where that's happened. And that itself has a price tag. Finally, I just want to call out leadership teams. Leadership teams traditionally have a lot of power dynamics at play, a lot of politics, and people are spending all their energy maybe protecting their own turf or silos, protecting their budgets, their projects, their people. They're not sharing resources, sharing ideas. They're not putting what's good for the whole ahead of their own self-interest. And this also has just an incredible price tag and also cascades throughout the organization. All right, so let me give you an example. I want to tell you a story. Let's make this come alive a little bit. So you can see, what does power intelligence or the lack of power intelligence really look like in an organization? So I'm going to tell you a very short story. I worked once, this is several years ago, I worked with a CEO and her leadership team because they had a really big turnover problem. And in the space of something like 24 months, they had 4 top priority hires leave the organization at great cost, and it created a lot of turmoil. And the last time was really shocking to them. They were blindsided because after it happened first, the second time they took great care. They had a super careful interview process. They took their time. They were just really careful. They didn't want it to happen again. They didn't want people to leave so soon. And so they selected 2 people. And at first it looked like everything was going well. The people were gelling really nicely on the team. Everybody liked them. They were getting along well. And of course, you know where this is going. So after 10 months, within like 2 weeks of each other, they both gave notice. And so the feedback from the exit interviews said that the 2 new hires felt that they were actually completely set up to fail, that they weren't given what they needed to succeed. They were given too little support, that the scope of their jobs kept changing, and that they had trouble gaining access to information that they needed to deliver on their outcomes. So the CEO and her team were just completely shocked. And because why? They had a completely different story. They said they felt they had done everything possible to make it possible for those new hires to succeed. And the VP to whom they reported on the leadership team said that every single day he checked in. Every single day he said, how's it going? Do you need anything? And he said on numerous occasions, look, my door's open, just knock anytime you feel like it, just ask any question. So obviously the question is, what's going on here, right? What's going on? If they were told to knock on the door, why isn't that enough? Why did they feel set up to fail? So I want to illustrate why the open door isn't open when it comes to power, okay? Because we view reality through lenses based on power and status. So when you are a newcomer, you're looking at everything through the lens of being an outsider or a newcomer. But the vice president, when you're an insider and you're on the established team or you have rank in some way, you're looking at everything through the insider or veteran lens. But if you're not comfortable in a culture, right, you feel you don't yet belong, you have low status, you have low rank because of that. And so this offer to knock on the door is enormous. It feels like a huge thing. But from the lens of the VP, knock on the door is really simple. It means you stand up out of your chair, you walk 4 steps down the hallway, you raise your arm and you kind of knock on a door. It's like, what could be simpler than that? But if you're a newcomer, it's incredibly difficult. And the reason is because of social costs and penalties. And we all know this, right? That speaking up incurs a social cost. And this is true for everybody, by the way. But the more you have high power or rank, the more you feel included because of your skin color, because of your seniority, because of your position, the more highly regarded you are, the more comfortable you are, the lower that social cost is. People are going to give you a pass if you make a mistake. People are going to hear you out. They're going to listen to you. But for Black and minority ethnic employees, for people with low social status because of gender or seniority, that social cost is enormous. It's very, very high. So every time you ask for help, every time you speak up and venture an idea or knock on a door, you're incurring the risk of diminishing your reputation, of exposing yourself as incompetent, and of proving the negative stereotypes already held against you, already that you're battling, right? So now this may lessen over time after you've built up relationships and some trust, but newcomers and Black and minority ethnic employees, people with lower social rank are under enormous pressure to prove themselves. So even if help is offered, you still don't know, like, well, how often can I knock? How often can I ask, right? I'm putting myself at risk of being seen as dense if I knock on the door 3 times, right? Are they going to think that they made the wrong, hire? And so the norms, power is a norm. Power is just the way things are. And if you have power, if you have high rank, it's invisible to you, right? It means you fit the norm. And so you don't notice it. You feel accepted. And so this allows you to take risks. What's more, when you're in the leadership position, though, you don't just fit the norm, you set the norms. Your behavior sets what's expected, right? Whatever you do is in your behavior becomes an expectation that others follow, and it's cascading throughout the organization. It becomes a behavioral expectation, right? It shows and signals to people what can and can't be done. But when you fit that, it's invisible to you. It's just the way things are. So what I'm getting at is that on my door, right? He feels comfortable and at ease in that culture, right? So that suggestion feels sufficient. So for example, if you think to yourself, I'm going to hold one-on-one meetings with all my employees once a month, and maybe I'm going to do town hall meetings weekly so I can hear from people, from your position of fitting the norm, that might feel like sufficient. But when you have high rank, you become both judge and jury of your decisions. You think, well, that should be enough. It's really hard to feel what the other person needs who's not necessarily fitting those norms. So this is why power is a blind spot. So this is what I want to get to. This is why the CEO was shocked, right? It was like they were blindsided by this, right? This is why they were blindsided. I was just doing some research and I discovered that the Soviet Union leaders were completely shocked and blindsided to discover that how quickly communism collapsed, right? And that you're thinking to yourself, how could they not know that, right? Or it reminds me of, like, in cheesy Hollywood movies where the spouse, typically the husband, says, their spouse, typically the wife, asks for a divorce, and the husband says, but honey, I thought it was going so well. How could that husband be blindsided? How do some people not see or minimize how terrible the workplace culture is for some people, right? How did those Soviet Union leaders not see how quickly people just, destroyed, tore down that wall, and how were today's leaders in society at large so blindsided by the Me Too movement, by the Black Lives Matter movement? And the reason is something I want to talk about is the lens of power. Power is a two-way lens. You have to think about it like a distorting filter or lens. And it distorts when you're in power, like I just showed with the VP, you're looking at it through that lens of your power, making decisions, seeing things, but people are viewing you through that lens on the other side. And it changes how, when people view you through the lens of power, it changes what they see. They don't see you anymore, right? They see power. They see a role. And your power amplifies and distorts your behavior. It makes it bigger, larger, more scary, or more decisive than even you intend. People are going to be hesitant to speak up in the face of that. Now, what I'm talking about now, I think every single one of you know, because do you remember the first time you were ever promoted in a leadership role out of your peer group? How many people had that experience where you were in a team or a peer and then you got promoted, and like Monday, you're like part of the gang, and then Tuesday, you're their manager, your former colleagues and friends? How many people remember that? Yes, I can't really see. So that was really, I'm asking and I can't see, but yeah, you remember it. A few people remember. So you ask a question on Monday and you get one answer, then you get promoted, and Tuesday you ask the same question, you're going to get like a different answer. So I think we all know, and that's because the lens of power. So what happens in that lens of power is that people want to impress you. They see you as the boss. They see you as someone important, and they need to impress you. They want to be on your good side, right? And they want also your support. Their livelihood is in your hands. Their success is in your hands. So they want your support for their agenda, for their career. And also some people are just mistrustful of authority, so they close down, right? They might have been your friend on Monday, but on Tuesday, you're the enemy. Has that ever happened to anybody? Suddenly they're going to treat you with more suspicion or skepticism. And the truth is that, you know, even if it's just mild, humans have this built-in reflex to defer to authority, right? So what does that mean? It means that you're just not going to get the same information. And in short, you are no longer you. So you're not just Julie or Joy or John anymore. You're like a symbol, and you're a symbol of power. And that's what happens through the lens of power. So people are viewing you through that lens. They're seeing this symbol. Their livelihood is in your hands. And it's also changing, though, it's a two-way lens, how you come across, your impact. It magnifies, it's a magnifying glass. So it magnifies your impact. So both positively and negatively. So it's like you're speaking through a megaphone, right? So you can say something really casual, and you think you're just sharing an opinion, but people think, oh, that's like the new strategy. That's what we have to follow now, right? Or you just, you share your opinion and suddenly the conversation goes dead. Why? Because people think that's now what we, you know, my opinion is not needed. That must be where we're going, right? Or even your praise through that magnifying lens can make someone's entire day, week, year, right? Imagine what a derogatory or flippant negative comment can do to somebody, right? Something you don't even remember, but it stays with them maybe the rest of their life. So this is how it looks. I just want to show you, the higher you rise, the greater your impact, right? Well, just in general, you have a bigger impact. And then through that lens of power, that impact is magnified 100-fold, 200-fold, right? And at the same time, the greater your impact, the more people are going to change their behavior to you, right? They're going to impress you. They're going to hold back. They're not going to give you information. They're not going to give you feedback. So they're kind of putting on an act for you. And you can see how this becomes a real vicious cycle, because the more they put on an act, the more they're changing their behavior, the harder it is for you to understand the impact you're having on people, right? You can't really read feedback accurately in a role of power. And you know that. You can't say to somebody, no, really, tell me what you really think. It's like trying to, it reminds me of trying to buy a car when you go into a car dealership. Like everything you say becomes, in their eyes, like a bargaining tactic, right? So you're in this loop where you can't see your impact, and people are changing their behavior, and the higher up you go, the harder it is to see, and therefore you're in this sort of dangerous place of not being able to understand your impact. And remember, the last thing I want to say, and I want to give us an opportunity to think about this and talk about it with each other, but I just want to remind you that we're not talking about just your position. Your positional power amplifies, magnifies your impact, but it's all your different powers that are creating that impact. Your seniority, your big mouth, your social boldness, your expertise, your degree of belonging, your social identity, right? So for example, and because of this impact, you could be, with the best of intent, you could be doing something that you think is going to be really helpful, but it has a less than positive impact. So for example, you share your opinion first, thinking I'm going to break the ice, or thinking let's get the conversation going, or I'll make it easy for people to speak up. Instead, it has the impact of shutting them down. Or maybe you decide to fast track a project because you can just make a phone call. You just pick up the phone and call the top leadership because you have that insider status and that seniority, and you think this is going to be best for everybody. Instead of going through all that red tape, I'll just make it happen. But instead of having a positive impact, people see that as preferentialism. They see you as taking advantage of your role. Or maybe someone says something, really a microaggression happens on a team, and you think to yourself, I don't want to derail the agenda, or I don't want to shame somebody, or I don't want to call that out right now because, I don't want to, derail everything, or I want to help that person save face. I'll talk to them in private. But instead, you're seen as making that okay, of setting a standard of behavior that people feel is unsafe. So best of intention can have these negative impacts because of the role of power. So I feel like I've been talking very fast, and that's probably true. I revert to the New Yorker in me when under pressure. So let's give you time to digest a lot of what we talked about. And there's two key ideas I wanna call out that I'd love you to discuss. One is this idea of impact, of having an impact you didn't intend through the lens of power. Were you surprised? Talk about a time that you were surprised to discover an impact you made that you didn't intend, that happened because of the power that you hold. And again, any kind of power. What happened? What was the cost? And then I want you to talk about the second question, which is, I'm talking about all these different types of power. How did you create that impact? What kinds of power might you have been using? Was it simply by virtue of your position, or was it your expert power, your intelligence, or maybe it was your insider status, or maybe it was your personal power, your personality, your voice, or your confidence, or your certainty. Maybe it was your social identity power as a white man or white woman, that you inadvertently used your privileges in a way that shut someone down or made it harder for people to speak up. All these powers, are you aware of them? It's really just a question, an open question. Which ones are you aware of using? And then which ones maybe are like, as I'm talking, you're thinking to yourself, gosh, I never think about that, and what could be the cost of not thinking about that? So I'm going to, can we put those questions? They are already in the chat. Thank you. Perfect. So you're going to have 10 minutes in groups of 3. And we'll bring you back in 10 minutes, and then we'll have a discussion. We'll have 10 minutes for discussion. Well, welcome back, everybody. You took full advantage. No one self-selected and said, I had enough of that. Let's take some, Lakshmi and Asif, you're gonna help, you're gonna moderate. So if you have a question or comment, I guess you could put it in the chat, and we'll take some questions, comments, reflections. Love to hear what you discovered, your reflections, your thoughts, or if you have any questions. We'll take about 10 minutes or so for that. You could also, I guess, put your hand up and speak. It is a somebody speaking. Anybody want to put their hand up? Break the ice. Did I scare you off by saying if you speak first, you're misusing your power? I did, didn't I? Oh,
say something. I was saying in my group about giving power away, or I automatically kind of assume a position of lesser power in a conversation when really, when I'm the expert in the room, sometimes I should be the person with most power. And I think you were saying about we look through the lens and we see the person's authority and their role rather than who they are. So sometimes when I enter the room, I should be the one with power, but I automatically put myself further down the line and look up when I don't need to. But it's having that, being in that safe space to be able to do that, because you also need the other person to give their power or suppress their power so that you can stand up.
But thank you, Sharon. Thank you. That's, I love that example. I love that because it highlights what good leadership should do, which is to give power or perhaps recognize, remember I talked about power is contextual. So recognize this is the moment for expert power. So position power now, I'm not giving up my power, but I'm highlighting expert power. This is what's needed here. And position power, a good use of it would be to forward people with the expertise. So I love that. Thank you. I see Yvonne's hand up, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm not great at hands. So I don't know how to get it back down again. I can't remember how I got it up. But anyway, I can. So I was really struck by your comment about about speaking first and breaking the ice. I do that all the time, and I suddenly realised, I hadn't ever noticed that that's what's closing things down. So that's really helpful. I'm going to be paying quite close attention to that in the future.
That's great. I also want to be careful here because sometimes it's right to speak up. Sometimes it's right to say this is where we're headed. So it doesn't mean, but if the goal is to have a really robust debate and hear from people, that just has a dampening effect.
I think I just do a very unhelpful thing where I say, this is the problem. What do people think? This is what I think. Then off you go. Just saying that out loud is clearly not very helpful.
It's a habit. It's a habit. Yeah, simple. Great. Thank you for that. I see Lisa hand up.
Hi.
So
I was we didn't quite get on to talking about it in the small group, but actually what I was reflecting on through all of that was it's really made me think about the times when I have to use my power. So I was just really struck by the thing that I try and let go of that and let my colleagues and my team do things. And what you come up against is they try and take action and make contact. I'll point them in the right direction. I'll send them off to go and do something. But the hierarchical power of the organization I'm in means they get ignored. And so then it gets escalated and then I end up having to step in. And so I'm just holding that that's making me really reflect on how we as a group of people are behaving with each other and how I might deal with that, because that's kind of really is a standout for me. Sometimes you're trying to do the right thing, but actually the organization is forcing you to do something that is frustrating for others.
That's interesting. And that's great to recognize that too, because it's a setup for failure and it's a setup to have you step in. And maybe part of leadership, we're going to talk about this when we look in a minute at the DPI, one of the behaviors of a healthy use of power is actually removing obstacles, like forecasting, what are obstacles that are actually not allowing people to really shine or do their work. So thank you for that, Lisa. Phil, I see a hand up there.
Yeah. We were just had to zip off as well because typically the doorbell rang, but as happens. But I was just actually sharing my experience in relation to coming from a place of disadvantage, a place of discrimination, to coming into now a position of CEO and seniority. And I always come from the balanced place of I am not the expert here. And I try and communicate that. When I say I'm not the expert here, I do not hold all of the answers to absolutely everything. Neither am I the most skilled individual within this organization. That's why we're all here. if we understand that we are all aiming towards the same aim, but we're in different roles and different functions, and we have that commonality, then hopefully it will reduce the power balance. Power is always going to be there. It's basically how it's actually executed, and an understanding of power, how we use that, and how we use it to the benefit of others, and not necessarily of ourselves. So try and come up with sort of creative ideas for people to be themselves, to bring themselves to work, and to bring that creativity and knowledge and expertise, because that's why you recruited those individuals with the, with their knowledge and expertise that they bring, and harnessing that so that there isn't necessarily an open door that you were talking about, an open door policy, but there's a I'm coming to you policy. Because when I come to you just to hear, what you have to say. So rather than come, because the power's there, my door is open, you come to me. So, when we kind of switch that around a little bit, and I'm coming to you, finding out how you're doing, how you're getting on, trying to understand your work, your world in terms of work world, and seeing how I can contribute to that. But really definitely understanding I'm not giving my role away in terms of leadership. I am who I am, and I'm here for a particular reason, but having a clear understanding of the benefits and the wealth of talent and knowledge that I would like to harness, and all of us would, so we can get the best for the company. And that's how I see things.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. I might pinch that you
Feel
come
free.
to me versus I come to you. That is really well. So I could have added that. That's wonderful. I love that. Thank you. Great. Well, let's go on. I also just want to mention my context. I'm out in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, and we're having a storm outside, and it's extremely windy and rainy. I live way out in the country. And this morning, 3 hours ago, there was a little power cut and lights came back on. I've got backup battery. The lights just flickered when, Phil, you were talking. I'm trying to manage my anxiety about this. So I just wanted to share it with everybody here. If things flicker or whatever, I'll come right back on. So yeah, fingers crossed. So I'm going to come back to share. I want to talk now about the DPI, and also Joy's going to share a little bit about how BRAP has been using it. So let me come back to my thanks everybody for your comments there. And we could really just spend a lot of time talking about that. So let's see. So I, given the lens of power, I mean, this is really the thing, given the lens of power, given what we just talked about how you can't see your impact, how can you know your impact? It's like a real paradox. Like if you can't see it because of that vicious cycle that we outlined, people are changing their behavior towards you. How do you understand your impact? And the truth is that you need feedback. Feedback is so critical and so vital. And in order to understand the experience you're creating on your teams and in your organization, getting accurate feedback is vital. And so my company embarked on a multi-year research study on power. We looked at the positive and problematic use of power in a leadership role and the impact that had on the organization, on the teams. And so we created a developmental process. That was our goal, that allows leaders to see their impact and how they're influencing others and using their power. And in that, we identified 7 critical leadership behaviors, which I'm going to talk about, related to the use of power. And there's different reports available. I just want to say we have, so in this process, there's the Diamond Power Index, there's a basic leadership impact report, the leader profile, there's one for coaches, the coaching power profile, one for teams. There's also a special spotlight on inclusion version, and within that, a special version that we co-created together with BRAP, which is really exciting, which is a spotlight on race. And then also we have an organizational culture survey. So these are the different instruments we have that look at the use of power. And I'm gonna talk about, I'm gonna share with you the 7 critical behaviors that our research uncovered. But I just want to emphasize something first. I want to emphasize, that this is a developmental approach. We're talking about power, and it's very easy to kind of go into, right and wrong or good or bad use of power. And when we talk about impact in the lens of power, we're assuming also that because it's so hard to understand your impact, that with the best of intentions, you could be making an impact you don't mean to make. And we need to improve that impact, but we want to do it in a developmental way. We want to provide support for people to do that. So one of the goals is that in using the DPI, we create a behavior pathway. And so by looking at behaviors, moment by moment behaviors, what are you doing in that leadership role? We're able to measure behaviors. Behaviors are valuable for me, and they're a pathway to improvement because you can assess behaviors. They're observable, they're measurable, so you can get an assessment. How well am I doing? And you can also define behaviors. You can model them or see them modeled by others, right? Which means that you can practice them, right? And you can actually, like a habit, right? And through coaching and feedback, you can improve them, right? And I just call this out because a lot of programs that focus on leading for inclusion and diversity focus a lot on attitudes or beliefs or just knowledge, which is extremely vital. And I'm not saying that's not important, but there's not very good research right now showing that knowledge of an issue, attitudes, biases, beliefs lead to behavior change. That's a problem. And so by looking at power behaviors, we're looking at what are the behaviors underlying your impact. So let's just look at these. And then let's just go through them one by one. So the first behavior that our research uncovered is that a healthy use of power, when leaders use their power well, they're approachable. They have what we call approachability, right? So these are questions. As I go through each one, I'm going to ask you questions to think about. How approachable are you? Do the people around you share their opinions freely? Are the meetings you hold really dynamic? Does everybody talk? Are there great ideas coming forward? Do people come to you with questions? Do you actually get asked for help? Are you ever surprised by bad news? So approachable leaders do these things. They model fallibility. They put themselves out there and show that they don't have the answer. So it makes it easy for others to ask questions. They actually ask for feedback and genuinely do something about it. It's not just lip service. They encourage others to share their opinions, and they facilitate meetings so that speaking time is equitable, that everyone, it's not just dominated by 1 or 2 people, but everybody speaks, and that there's crosstalk, right? They don't shut down conversations because they're uncomfortable or threatening, and they're available, right? Like you might think you're available, but you're also busy. Like how easy is it for people to get time on your calendar? How much time are you present when you're with people? Are you checking your emails? Or are you like really fully present? So these are approachable behaviors, and it's a key way that leaders use their power well. The second one is that we found is that leaders who are seen to be using power well are respectful. So ask yourself these questions to see if you are respectful. I'm sure everybody here thinks they're respectful, and you're probably right. But check out these questions. Do you behave with civility and respect to everybody equally? Do you make sure that if other people are rude or disrespectful or do something that's aggressive, that you speak up, that you shut it down, that you set a boundary? Do you take reports of disrespect seriously? And can you read people's feedback accurately? Do you understand how other people are experiencing your communication, both verbal and nonverbal, both digital and face-to-face? So respectful leaders understand fundamentally that everyone has different communication styles and different tolerance for things like loudness for things like direct interaction, for how close you stand, right? Sensitivities and tolerances differ. And you make it your responsibility for adjusting your behavior to them, not expecting them to adjust their behavior to you. You create safety by interrupting rudeness and acts of aggression, right? You don't let things slide, right? And you take complaints seriously. Now, it's really, we might think we do, but it's very easy to make excuses. You hear this all the time. Well, you know what? That's just John. You gotta understand, that's how he or she comes across, or, well, that's just the culture here, or that person's having a bad day, or, you just got to develop a thicker skin, right? So we don't minimize or brush off complaints. These are some of the key things that respectful leaders do. The second thing is leaders are empowering, and this came up in one of the conversations about removing obstacles. So ask yourself these questions, whether or not you're empowering. This is the third thing that a healthy use of power, leaders with a healthy use of power do, is that they're empowering. Are you comfortable coaching and developing everybody on your team, even people who are different from you? Do you understand and value the developmental needs of the people that you lead? When you give feedback, is it specific? Is it actionable? Is it useful? Can you actually see people growing and developing based on the feedback that you're giving? And are you aware of the obstacles that people have to delivering good work, to being able to succeed in their roles and with their tasks? So ensuring that people have the resources that they need to succeed and reach their full potential, that's empowering. Publicly acknowledging contributions, that's empowering. And the opposite of that is notice when somebody else takes credit for someone else's idea, calling that out, attributing correctly where ideas come from. And being very specific. Sometimes we're shy to give straight feedback or to be specific. So making sure that you're coaching and giving very specific feedback to people that they can grow from. The fourth behavior, when leaders use their power well, our research found that they don't shy away from power. Sometimes we mistake underusing power for being good with power. We know that power can be problematic, so we try to be like too democratic or too egalitarian or too soft and minimize our authority footprint. But that doesn't work. That's going to make a mess. So the conflict competence means that, well, let me ask you some questions. If you're conflict competent, can you raise difficult and controversial topics necessary to move the conversation forward? Right? Can you put tough topics on the table? Can you work with difference productively? Can you open up to debate and disagreement when it arises and come and find out how to work with it productively? Can you hold challenging conversations and be direct and hold people accountable? So this is what conflict competent leaders do. They raise difficult issues, right? When necessary. They don't shy away from it. They draw a line and hold people accountable. Right? There's consequences to behaviors. They intervene when appropriate, and they can facilitate debate and disagreement productively, understanding that, debate, disagreement, this is like the raw material of good ideas, right? Of teamwork. So the fifth behavior that we discovered in our research was that power smart leaders are fair. Sounds obvious. They're not preferential, right? So ask yourself these questions to determine whether or not you are fair. Do you interrogate your preferences to make sure that your feelings, your biases, your own personal needs aren't influencing your decision-making? Do you make opportunities for growth available to everybody, all your team members, not just the high performers? When it comes to bias, it's not just about people who are like us or who like us, but it's also sometimes expedience gets in the way and we're just trying to get things done. So we always go to the same people. So fair leaders interrogate their biases. They make sure that their opportunities for promotion, assignments, everything's allocated fairly. And they don't let expedience drive decision-making or ease, oh, this person, they're always going to ask too many questions and I'm in a rush. Let me just go with this person because I know they're going to get the job done. I see a lot of leaders who think they're fair, but they're always letting expedience drive the bus. Fair leaders also get outside input on their decisions, knowing that biases are very tricky, that feelings can be very deceiving. And they notice and fix inequities, both micro inequities like speaking time in meetings, right? Making sure people aren't interrupted or sidelined or ignored. And also obviously macro inequities, opportunities for, policies, procedures, that things are done transparently and fairly. And they also don't tolerate insider-outsider dynamics. This is a real key thing. Remember the organizational dysfunction we talked about, that cliques and insider-outsider dynamics are some of the most toxic things in a workplace. The sixth one, 2 more to go, is that healthy use of power, they're diplomatic. And what do we mean by that? It means that they don't get drawn in to gossip and dramas. So ask yourself, are you diplomatic? Do you ever get drawn into gossip, to dramas in the workplace, right? Are you trusted with confidential information? Are you aware of context? Are you context savvy? What should and shouldn't be shared? How do you represent the organization or your team in public? So when leaders are diplomatic, when they use their power well, they tend to be trustworthy with confidential information and they never gossip, they interrupt gossip, right? It's really important because gossip leads to mobbing behavior and bullying and toxic workplaces. It's one of the top complaints that employees have. And also minority employees are almost always the subject of gossip, right? It's definitely unfair who gets gossiped about. And also power smart leaders are very aware of context. In this context, I should talk about things, but in this context, I can't. With this person, I can disclose this, but with this person, I can't, right? And they always remember that they represent the organization, that they're a role model, and they need to not be talking negatively about the leadership, the team, the company, other people, policies, even if they don't agree with them. And the reason is that you as a leader aren't the creator of divisions. So you're not saying, oh, the bozos upstairs, it's, yet another harebrained idea from the top leadership, or that team over there, they're always creating problems for us. And, you're not making more conflict and divisiveness by gossiping about others or venting inappropriately. Finally, the 7th behavior that our research uncovered is that when leaders use power well, they're what we call judicious. They're not entitled or indulgent. So ask yourself these questions to think about whether or not you're judicious. So would other people ever say that you act in an entitled manner? Do you ever take advantage of the perks or privileges of your role or your office, right? Do you hold yourself to the same standards you hold others to? Do you ever inconvenience people, right? Do you ever, for example, you're late or you show up late to your own meetings, maybe you don't send out the notes on time, ask for favors. Is there anything you do that makes it harder for people to work with you and you can get away with it because you're the boss? So some of what judicious leaders do is they, what I call, split the difference. And what do I mean by that? It means that they don't let their comfort take priority, right? So they inconvenience themselves as much as they inconvenience others. And I want to give you a really concrete example. I see this one a lot. If you're the leader and the best time for you to have the weekly meeting for your team is 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning on Mondays, right? And you always have that time, it means that it's good for you, but the same people are doing childcare or they're calling in from Hong Kong and it's 11 o'clock at night, or they're having to drive their kids to school, right? So what's happening? It's comfortable time for you. You're present. You've had your coffee and your breakfast, but somebody else is, the end of their workday, or they're driving their kids and they can't give their full attention to the meeting. So they don't show up well. What does that mean? It means they're not participating. What does that mean? It means they don't look like a good performer, right? So your comfort is making that decision. That's judicious. Another example is, they let conflict of interest drive their decisions, or if they're judicious, they avoid conflict of interest. So they don't put people on the spot. They don't ask people to do favors. They don't make decisions based on politics, right? So divert resources to their team because of a project that they're attached to, but they're thinking about what's good for the whole, not just what's good for my part of the whole. And they lead by example. They absolutely show up as a role model. So they behave exactly as they expect other people to do, right? They follow the rules they set for others. They show up on time. They show up prepared. They don't let those perks and privileges, they don't take advantage of them. So these are the 7 behaviors, and I'm going to wrap up here. I know we've covered a lot of ground. There's a lot to talk about. I'd love Joy to talk about the example of how BRAP has been using this in their programs. And I just want to share very quickly, like some of the ways that people are using the DPI before Joy does. There's 4 central types of uses for the DPI. This is not by any means conclusive, but where there's an interest in getting people fully engaged and empowered. For example, where teams are flatter, where organizations are trying to flatten out hierarchies, like agile, or where there's a need for greater psychological safety because there's a need for greater risk-taking and innovation. The DPI is very helpful because it shows leaders how to lead to get others to be more empowered and to be more engaged. Culture and leadership. So connecting the dots. How is my leadership impacting the culture where there's cultural issues, where there has been instances of bullying or discrimination or harassment? What are we as leaders doing that's influencing that, or that could influence it more positively? How do we connect what's happening at the culture back to our leadership, and what are the changes we need to make as a leadership team and as individuals? Multinational and cross-cultural leadership, where people have been leading teams that are cross-cultural or international, where there's completely different understandings of power, different understandings of deference, of hierarchy. And so different expectations on how power is used, and we need to understand those differences. And finally, to strengthen leadership teams, where we can, how are we using power with each other? Right? Can we increase our collaboration? Can we increase how we're working together, break down the silos, not just get mired in politics, but be able to really, have tough conversations with each other, share resources, and be a high functioning team. And finally, a huge use of the DPI is with inclusion, equity, diversity, and anti-racism work. That's been a big project of ours over the last year. And I'm going to stop talking here and let Joy talk a little bit about it, and then we can have some questions. So Joy, I'll let you.
Thanks, Julie. Thank you so much. I'm not going to talk very much about it because I'm sure that people will be really wanting to ask you questions after that fabulous presentation. But just to pick up where Julie's left on, we've been working and had the pleasure of being working with this tool for a couple of years now, and we were invited to work on a program around white allyship. And I'm not trying to be politically correct when I talk about white allyship. What I'm really trying to describe is the fact that the way that we are socialized, our own identity, makes our engagement with issues of race and race equality. It makes us less engaged. It means that we often don't feel we have any ownership or leadership responsibility. And what we've really been trying to do with this program is work with white presenting leaders within the NHS to help them to develop that muscle so that they can be more competent and confident leaders in terms of anti-racist practice. But we included the Diamond Power Index, and we included it deliberately because of what Julie has very eloquently described in terms of the understanding of the various leadership behaviors, but also recognizing that if we could help people not only to grow in the understanding of issues of race and racialization, but also to recognize that their behaviors mattered. And I think that's kind of the combination that we've been using within the program. And there are a couple of people here actually who are part of the White Allies cohort and have also taken the DPI. So I think if we had time, they could nod or they could give a thumbs up to it or whatever, but it's been a really helpful thing. And I think the other thing I'd just say, just before I give you an opportunity to ask questions, is that it's been so beneficial to work with Julie to think about how we could extend the use of the DPI to think about how leadership and your use of power, how that might impact on people who are racialized. So that's been the real benefit of using it on the White Allies program. So not only do people have a really good opportunity to look at their leadership and to think about how they can develop their leadership further, but they also have the opportunity to think how people who are racialized as Black or Asian or minority ethnic, or whatever you might want to describe it, how they may be impacted too by your leadership if you are someone who's white presenting. So that's been the real cherry on the cake, really, in terms of being able to work with Julie on the Diamond Power Index. So I'm going to close my bit now and just open it up. We have a few minutes. If people have any direct questions, then please either put them in the chat or come off mute, raise your hand, and let's have a bit of a conversation before the end. Am I doing that thing, Julie, where I've spoken first and nobody wants to speak? Oh, don't do that to me, people.
We've both done it, Joy. We've just shut everybody down. I think that's what's.
Is this something that you we commission you to do? Is it something that we use ourselves? I wasn't quite sure.
Is that a question for me, Shannon?
Yeah, sorry. So how do we use the tool as separate individual organizers?
Right. So to use the tool, we have certified coaches. So we train people to administer the tool to a leader or with a leader. So if you were interested in this, we would either put you in touch with certified coaches. Obviously, BRAP is a certified team, and they can administer it. So it could be done one-to-one individually, like in an executive coaching or leadership coaching engagement. BRAP is using it as part of a program. Some people have their whole teams do it and go through the process, and they engage a coach to do that with them. So so it does have, there's a middle person. The administrator is like a coach or a practitioner, HR or talent development professional. Yeah. But if you contact Joy or myself, we'd be happy to put you in touch. Debbie has your hand up.
Hi, thanks, Julie. That was super helpful and interesting. And I got a couple of questions. One is that I think that's sort of about your comment about not being too egalitarian, and sort of how that fits with the other things. And I've got an example of it in the organisation I work in, where we've got a member of staff who's super committed, acting in lots and lots of suggestions. At a junior level in the organisation, quite often those suggestions are kind of just a bit off kilter, so they don't get taken up. So the impact is that this person is kind of shut down. Not nasty, not. I mean, yes. Maybe it's not never, but you know, those conversations, those sort of suggestions can't go anywhere, and so that person's experience will have been never being listened to, kind of not getting their views heard. But we also kind of can't implement them because they're not quite in line with the organisation, and that's probably, I imagine, a lot of people who have had that experience. I just wonder how that kind of thing would you suggest that we deal with it.
So you called out in the beginning the underuse of power or being too egalitarian, and I think that that person, if that were, so I'm obviously, there's a lot there, and I'm like the doctor diagnosing at a cocktail party, like I have no idea what I'm really talking about. But the thought that comes to mind would be someone's not giving that person feedback, and that person is not getting, they're not having an opportunity to improve their suggestions and to get more on track. And so I do think it's a conflict averse or lack of conflict competence or lack of empowerment on our scale, because somebody's avoiding a hard conversation, or somebody doesn't want to hurt the person's feelings, or whatever the reason is, that person needs feedback to succeed. They're going to, over time, that's going to go into their, view of themselves, or they're going to become, I mean, who knows? I don't know who the person is, but so that's what I think. I think that someone's not giving them feedback, and that would be very helpful to them to help them get their suggestions more on track, so they'd be more accepted, and then they would succeed more. Sharon.
It's just an observation on what you just said. I was promoted a couple of years ago. So there are meetings when I go to, I feel like I've just talked a load of crap, but nobody empowers you with the context so that you can show up. It's like I started out with great ideas. I've had great ideas along the way, and these great ideas are just starting to fit in the organization because I've gone out and done courses and gotten my own, education to be able to kind of understand the world that I'm in now. So the difference between being a senior admin and being in a leadership role, and it's a different world, but nobody gives you that context because everyone's busy and doing the day job. So I think that's one of the challenges we face when we kind of have to be in leadership spaces.
Thank you. Yeah, it's the lack of.
I think you might have muted yourself, Julie.
I muted myself. Maybe I've talked too much. Is there another question? Anybody else?
You think it's the world trying to give you a clue? I don't think so. There's so many wonderful comments in the comment box.
Chat. So, yeah, there are. I just saw that. Yes, humanitarian, INGO organizations. Absolutely, we worked with NGOs and nonprofits, educations, public sector, as well as corporations. So really across the spectrum. Yeah. Any other questions, comments, thoughts?
Phil's got his hand up. Phil, I think you might be the last
Phil.
question.
Yeah, it's just I think mine is, I kind of hear in two guises really, in terms of, from your perspective, Joe understands from an NGO, but also from a public sector. And this has been very enlightening today, and for me to take back to the NHS where I'm sitting on the board, and seeing how this kind of coaching, I guess, and awareness raising can make a huge difference. And I guess which Joy will be able to testify to this, which is, people are always looking at the money trail. So how is this going to be beneficial? And you've actually demonstrated that in the slides in terms of what power costs and the impact of that. So I found today, and I know this is just a snippet, it's an introduction to, but I found it really, really beneficial, and it's got me sort of thinking, and how in both sectors, how this can be applied, and the benefits of it. It's something that's very dear to me anyway, because it's my style of working, but actually having a program that actually looks to readdress at times the power balance. There does need to be strong leadership as well at the end of the day, but it's just how that's executed and the impact that can have on the workforce as a whole, and then also of the different layers of leadership. And obviously, if you're trying to change a culture, because sometimes a culture is not, well, not sometimes, often a culture is not one person, but it's how that is being filtered throughout the whole organization. And then everybody then continues in that vein because they feel they have the license to do that, given the position that they're in and that they hold, and how they can dampen and not enhance creativity and that understanding of bias as well. So rather than me going on, I could go on and on and on and on, but I just found it really useful. So I will be taking this back.
It's great.
That was good.
Thank you, Phil. That's great. That's great. So I like to leave people a few minutes at the end as opposed to taking time away from people. So if there's no other questions, I'll turn it back over to Joy to close, and just want to thank everybody for the opportunity to talk about this today with you all. And the power stayed on. So thank you. And yeah.
So thank you, Julie. And, you know, I can't thank you enough. And we're very grateful the power stayed on as well. You know, as usual, it's a fantastic presentation. As someone who, and as an organization that views the tool, we're really seeing some of the benefits. We've been working with civil society organizations on the PAC program. We've been working with the NHS. We've been working with other types of organizations and teams as well. So it's been so useful to have this tool. So thank you very much for that. Also, thank all of you for coming on a sort of dark evening, and hoping that this has perhaps given you an opportunity to be enlightened and to think about the application of it. If you haven't been, I feel like I'm an advert now, but if you haven't joined the Equality Republic, do so, because that's where you get lots of information about upcoming seminars, including fabulous people like Julie. We have a couple of things coming up. We have a seminar on the diversity diamond, that the whole issue of how do you square that circle between what you think you're doing and what you're really delivering. Are we the change that we want others to be? And we've got Heather Boutroux, who is the creator of the Diversity Diamond, somebody else from the States, and she's on the 11th of November. And then we've also got something for the arts sector on the 18th of November. And you can find out by emailing BRAC or emailing Severin or joining the Equality Republic, and you can get those bits of information, and you can also get further events and things next year. I think that's all. I just want to thank the BRAC team and people doing the chat and all of the other bits and pieces behind the scene, and wish you a really good evening, and big up Julie again before you go. Okay, take care everybody. Thank you.
For myself to be around no one else, I'm working on my spells to get me out of here. Oh yeah, you're working.